to the computer. Hello, and thank you for joining us. We are here with continuing the conversation for the Right Women's Book Fest, where we had a really fun conversation back in September during the Book Fest about fat representation, and we have decided to expand that into 3 different segments. And this is the second segment on fat representation in fantasy. So I have with me today these wonderful 3 authors who will introduce themselves and we will get into the questions. You want to go first, AK, Allie?
Yes, sure. I'm AK Mulford. I'm a romantic fantasy author. I'm originally from the States, but I live in New Zealand now, so you might hear my accent go a little bit weird sometimes. And yeah, I have a passion for writing characters and main characters that don't often get to be the main characters of their stories, and writing relatable characters in fantastical worlds. So yeah, that's fun.
All right. And then we'll go Sheena.
Hi, I'm Sheena Boekweg. My debut, it was Glitch Kingdom, which came out through 501 Friends in February 2020. And then my sophomore is A Sisterhood of Secret Ambitions, which came out in June of this last year. And I'm also a contributor in Everybody Shines, which is a fat positive anthology. And I am also, just like AK said, a big advocate for writing plus size characters and making sure that plus size, especially in YA, that these plus size girls can have their happy ever after, and that they can know that they're worth every bit as much as anyone else, and that they can have every centered that they need to have as well. So thank you so much.
All right, and Alexis.
Hi, my name is Alexis. I'm a new author. I have my debut coming out later this summer, and then I am part of the Curves of Magic anthology, which will be my first publication, so that's super exciting. My goal with my stories is to create plus size characters that are have the main character energy that we love to see, but don't always have to be like insecure or have like a romance. It's more about like making them a full, well-rounded character. So all of my MCs for the near future will be plus size, and that is my first goal as a new author.
All right, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Mary Warren, and I am the founder of a website called Fat Girls in Fiction. And our mission is to uplift stories with fat main characters and the authors who write those stories. And I am also an author, and I have, well, my book's coming out in March. I have Curves and Magic coming out. And then hopefully in August, my book, Hannah and the Highlander, will be out. So that is what we have. So we're gonna dive right in, which I think is an important question, which is, why do you think it is important to write fat main characters? What, I know some of us touched on that in our intro, but what made you decide this is important to me and I'm going to make sure that I write fat main characters? If anyone wants to go first.
I'll hop in. Is that okay?
Great.
So I read Dumplin', and I had written several books before that. But when I read Dumplin', it was the first time I had really seen a character who looked like me be centered and accepted and loved like fully. And it changed me like all the way deep into my core. It changed the way I write, and it changed the way I dreamed. I used to dream in thin bodies. Like I would change even like who I was in my own dreams to just to have those adventures. And it was such a healing thing to read that it changed the way I write forever. And it helped me emotionally to like accept who I am. And I think that is like a good goal overall to in my own writing. I want everybody to read my writing to know that I think that they are worthy of love.
Yeah.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, it is a lot about feeling seen. You know, I think a lot of us have grown up feeling like we had to put ourselves in other characters' shoes that didn't quite fit us. And we had to kind of imagine being these characters in thin bodies in order to be the heroes of these stories. And for me, I wanted to invite more people to be the heroes of their own stories, to feel seen in that way. And I think that we all know what it means to feel like somebody saying, I see you, I understand you, I know what it's like to live in a body like this. And to be able to create those characters and then have them go on these like fantastical adventures or do really cool things and have their whole own story where they're not just the comic relief for the villain, but actually a fully fleshed character who has goals and dreams and aspirations that have nothing to do with their body type, I think is just really important and special. And we don't realize how much we put ourselves in the narrative of the characters that we're given as fat people. And then when we realize, oh, I can be more than this, I can have other options. I don't have to be this sort of character in my own narrative, in my own life. And so that's one of the reasons why I feel like it's really important to write more characters and more diversity.
Yeah, I'd say my inspiration is also very similar to Allie's. Like, I felt like I wasn't seeing myself in stories, and that really impacted me, especially once I joined Book Talk and I was reading a lot more. So that was kind of the catalyst for me putting this as like a huge focus for my writing. I think I just really want to expand the media that bigger people have to consume, whether that's being a queen or being an anti-hero or, you know, being whatever they want to be. I just want to really expand the variety that's out there. I'm really happy with a lot of the amazing stories that have come out recently. I feel like we got so much diversity, but I would really like to put my own style into that and just like make it more accessible for more people.
Definitely. All right, so that is a good segue. We'll go into our next topic, which is going to be more fantasy based. So there seems to be a growth in other areas, like there in YA and in romance. There still needs to be more, but you can find it. But in other genres, it's almost impossible, and fantasy being one of them. And I just wanted to see if you guys had any opinions on why there is such a problem with the fantasy. Oh goodness, my ring light's falling. The fantasy rep. All right, there we go. Rep in fantasy.
I'll go first.
Okay.
So for me, I think fantasy is the main genre that I like to read. And I think what I notice most is there's a lot of fat phobia in fantasy. So I think that's why it needs better representation. I think, and it's just so limited. There's so few bigger characters, and they're rarely women is another thing. I think there's just a lot of opportunity there to make the genre so much more inclusive and give fat people more well-rounded characters within this genre. I think we can take a lot of cues from like fantasy or romance and what they're doing because it's been done so well, especially in more recent books. So yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm seeing in fantasy is just like the bad rep and then the lack of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even women in general being in fantasy, you know, is only like a recent thing. And then to have like a diversity of bodies within the women that are portrayed in fantasy, you know, I think that we've drifted towards this kind of like archetype of a skinny blonde character with pointy ears, and that being like the only kind of fantasy rep, like let alone expanding that in any direction. And so I think that there's just a lot of opportunity for more authors. And I think, you know, being able to self-publish for me, I've been able to kind of like push the boundaries of what I want to see, and realizing that there's other people who want to see those things too. And being able to kind of like stretch beyond the kind of like Lord of the Rings characters that we've been given and actually create more diversity for people to be able to see themselves in the stories in ways that they haven't before, because we've been kind of told this is the template, this is the world you write within, and this is the outline for how to do a fantasy, and this is the outline for how to create a fantasy character. And I think that it does take a little bit of kind of reinventing to stretch beyond that box.
I think there's also an issue of imagination. You know, we readers will happily accept dragons in a fantasy story. They will happily accept magic or fire coming out of your fingers or any kind of thing. But some readers are not as accepting of diversity when it comes to race or when it comes to body size. And it's really expanding our audience and also expanding our own imagination. Like if you feel like this is the only kind of book I'm looking for, I only want Sarah J. Maas. Like, well, Sarah J. Maas is great. We all love her, but like we can keep growing. Like there's more here too. And I think that as we really create these worlds, we are sending a message about what we want in a future or what we want in a fantasy. So if we are creating worlds where there's only white people, like that's saying something very, very specific. And in my opinion, not great. Obviously horrible. And if we are doing the same thing where we're not reflecting even in a small way the world that we live in, like statistically, isn't it 1 in 3 people are fat? And if you even like, let's just look at like a Marvel movie. Can you imagine if 1 in 3 Marvel Avengers were fat? That's statistically what the audience that are receiving those stories would be looking at. And so I think it's really important, not only that we are including body diversity in main characters, but also that all authors are including more body diversity throughout the board and creating body diversity that is not harmful or not problematic, but just, I think the first step is really just allowing us to exist in fantasy worlds. So like a lot of people, writers might say that I like to write like this skinny princess. That's just who she is and that's what I want. And I honestly, good for you. That's fine. I have no problem with you writing your story the way you want to. But if you could include more, it would make your story better because it would be better to reflect the world around you. And it would also include more readers into being able to see themselves. So, yeah.
So bringing up Marvel is actually a pretty good segue because there are no fat superheroes until Thor goes through all of that, and then you get Fat Thor, which was so problematic and so fat phobic. So there a lot of times when fantasy, like a lot of mainstream and older fantasies do address fatness or have fatness, it's done in a harmful way. So what are some of the things, the pitfalls that you would like authors to think about before they write characters in this way when it comes to fat representation?
Well, the first thing I think you need to be careful with as a writer is how much fat trauma you're going to add, especially if you are a thin author and if your full perception of what fat characters are comes from from reading bad or harmful things, or like your own viewpoint or lens might be a little bit skewed. So I would personally suggest that most thin authors that you shouldn't include fat trauma in your fat characters. I think that fat trauma, it's important too. Like if it's a lived experience, it's important so that people can feel seen, because we've all been called names or had things happen to us because of our size, or discrimination in the health, like with doctors or things like that. But that's the kind of thing that someone with lived experience should really go after, in my opinion.
I think another thing that authors should consider is how they equate morality with size. I think a lot in my experience, what I see in fantasy is emphasizing a character's evilness or like undesirableness through their body being bigger. And that's also often paired with like gluttony and food scenes. So I think those are things to navigate very carefully if you are going to write bigger characters in your fantasy stories, is to try and avoid those unfortunate stereotypes that have been created within the genre and kind of like part of the template now.
And I think even just writing only one character creates problems in and of itself, because you're putting all of your values into one character. And like Sheena was saying, like if you have a whole range of cast and characters with all different body sizes and types, it, you know, if your villain only looks one way, and then you don't have any other, they're not also the love interest and the friend and there's so many other characters that you are missing out. If you're only putting the characters with like negative character qualities in fat bodies, then that is hugely problematic, because that's reflecting on what you value or you think of as that thing, you know. So for example, in some of my stories, one of the evil kings is fat, but also so is a love interest, and so is the main character, and so is a hero, and so is the, like, you know, the handsome one who like wanders in, and with, you know, so there's all of these other characters too. So it's kind of saying, like, in the same way that my characters of color or my queer characters have a whole diversity of personalities and ranges, we're not creating this just kind of like one stereotypical character that we kind of hang our hat on and say, this is what my fat character is, and I just kind of plug them into my stories.
Yep. All right. And so I think we kind of touched on a lot of this. Another thing that I think is interesting is a lot of times when it comes to fantasies in particular, people love fan art. And a lot of times characters who are written as fat characters are then portrayed as thin characters, either in the fan art or in TV shows. And I find that harmful because, you know, it sucks. So I don't know if anyone, I know I've like Alexis and I have talked a lot about this on TikTok, and that's kind of how we came to be in each other's like TikTok circles, was this conversation. So I wonder if you guys had any thoughts on like those, like in the culture of fantasies and those problems.
Oh, so many thoughts. We're all how do you even jump in on something like that?
Yeah.
Well, I could tell you, as an author, when I receive fan art, especially if it's done by a teen, if they have thin washed, I just want to clearly say that I still say thank you, and I am honored and I love it, because it is not their fault that their brains thin wash a character. You know what I mean? And I absolutely love and accept it. As I have commissioned art from artists, it's hard, real hard actually, to find artists who will even do fat characters when you're doing art. And then when they say, yeah, we'll do it, then you have to go and work with them so much, because they just don't have the experience a lot of times capturing bodies of different sizes and shapes. And so if there are any artists looking or listening, I would highly recommend you can keep working on drawing bodies of different shapes, because it's so important, and I think it increases your skills. But I think every single time I have commissioned art, I have had to make them make their hands smaller, because their arms, like their upper arms, are like the size of a fat person, but then their forearms are like still big, and then their hands are like twice the size of their heads. And it's like, fortunately, my hands are, my bones are still made of bone. Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of hard that way. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to that. But there's also, I think, I apologize if I go on too long. There's an internalized issue, at least for me, when I'm looking for fan art, because in my head, I see them as fat and beautiful, oftentimes. And then when a character is drawn, sometimes my own fat phobia will like kind of come out and try and attack it. And it's like, what if people don't like them? Like, I don't know. I feel like it's a hard thing, because you want them to be able to be imagined as a character of any size, you know, like I want small fats to be able to read my characters and see it. And I want like super fats to read my characters and still like absolutely see themselves in it. And so when we do like a specific fan art saying this is what they look like, then I feel like that's limiting sometimes. And Anyway, I have a lot of thoughts. I'm not sure if any of them are well organized, but it can be.
No, that's good.
Yeah, I've had experiences with that more with people whitewashing my characters in fan art, and I've always just kind of like lovingly private messaged them and just said like, hey, like this is what the character looks like and this is how they're described and things like that. But you know, I appreciate the art because like that's amazing that you've taken the time, but like just ask you to represent them properly. But the problem, and I've seen this hasn't happened to me, but I've seen happen to other authors where people will just say, well, this is how I want to see them. You know, this is how I want to see this character. I want to see them thin or white or straight or however. And I think that that is hugely problematic when we've just decided that like, oh, well, I can't stretch my imagination to the point of imagining this character as anyone else than what I want them to be, especially in fantasy where you have people who, you know, are imagining like people having magic and things like, you know, flying through the air and stuff. It's like you don't have a problem with them with their hands glowing red and their eyes shooting laser beams, but you know, they can't be fat, you know. And so I think that it's kind of like a loving and gentle pushback of saying like, let's try and imagine, you know, I think a lot of people, especially like people in thin bodies, haven't had to imagine themselves as anything else. And you could fill that in for any other type of diversity too, where we've just all felt like people who are kind of in like the default character's position haven't had to imagine themselves as any other character, and there's sometimes resistance to them even wanting to try to put themselves in the shoes of these other characters. And I think about when I've seen positive plus size representation, how much joy and confidence and value to my own life I find with that, in the same way I do with fan art. When I see TikToks of people like dressing up or wearing cool outfits, and I'm like, maybe I could wear that, you know, like, or people just like living their best lives and having joy in their lives. It almost feels like it gives us more permission, even though logically we know we should already have it. Seeing that representation matters, and it gives us that sense of like, I could do this, I could be this, I can care about these things. And so that's why I feel like we're missing an opportunity when fan art is then washing these characters, because we're missing the opportunity for people to go like, I look like that and that's okay, and I can still be this kick-ass main character.
Mhm.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one thing I've been trying to do to kind of like help this problem, because I'm really into fan art, like I love art. So half my Instagram feed is just art. So what I've been trying to do is create like a collection of artists who are drawing bigger bodies and better body diversity, as well as like, you know, racial diversity and all kinds of stuff like disability rep and all that. So I've been starting to work on a collection of artists so that I can put a list together, like a spreadsheet or something, and share that with other people who are writing plus size characters. So I'm hoping to help the issue, but I see so much of the skinny washing like on a day-to-day basis. And I've had a lot of trouble commissioning my own character, which has been like a huge thing for me because like I said, I love art. So I've commissioned like a lot of art so far. But luckily I found great people who are willing to learn. But like Sheena was saying, you have to like, there's so much extra back and forth and like correcting and like collaboration that I just don't see when I have my straight size characters drawn. So it's interesting, and there are a ton of issues, but like a lot of people are willing to learn, and there's more and more artists who are willing to like learn how to draw more types of bodies and like putting effort into building that skill. So that's something I'm really looking forward to in the next year or two.
Yeah.
And I think the more we add to like the collection of fat bodies and art, like the easier that is for more artists to expand their ability to visualize. And so even when it is hard, like, and it is hard to commission art to go and give them that specific step-by-step work, I think that that's work worth doing, you know, especially if you can get it done right, because it really can have a big impact.
Yeah, I know there's so many different layers of fat phobia in art, because you have the perceiver and the creator, and it's just so multifaceted. And I was getting my cover designer for my book, and I went through and I spent more money on my cover than I did on an editor, because to me, that cover is very important, and having that representation right. And looking through people's portfolios online and seeing that they only drew skinny people, I was like, you can't draw my character if I can't see that you can find beauty in a fat body, because you have to be able to find beauty in a fat body as an artist. So, and I think that is also part of the problem. Just, general internalized fat phobia in all of us.
Yeah, especially if you're using a cover designer who does stock imagery. I think we all know the issue of stock imagery. So originally I had gone with the cover artists who did stock imagery because their covers were amazing and they were willing to work with me to create a plus size character. But we had such an issue that I ended up having a friend. I had an artist who had drawn a picture of my character for just a fan art, and I used that with the permission of the artist to have my friend redraw a silhouette of it to use for the cover, because we could not find anything online that fit the style or the silhouette that we wanted to do. And it was just such a crazy process, but it's especially prevalent with people who do stock photo covers or art or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a big problem with stock photos. You can't, it's just not there. You can't pull it if it's not there. So yeah. All right. So I think that also in the fantasy representation, and I think it goes through all genres, is that a lot of acceptance of diversity tends to start in YA and romance. And I think, where we are seeing movement in fantasy is also in YA and fantasy romance. Those are the areas that you're starting to see a lot more body diversity and a lot more just general diversity of all marginalized people. So I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on that.
I think part of it's a younger generation thing too. And Gen Z and our which generation is that? I don't even know. Younger people than me. But I write new adult age, so 18 to 25 is kind of my target demographic. And people at that age, are a lot more thinking about I want to, I love my body and I want to see myself in these worlds. And there's a lot more positivity and joy around a lot of the diversity and the representation there. And I think that as on a whole, they've been vastly underserved in the amount of stories that have diversity in them, especially in the main characters. And I think time and time again, they're proving with their wallets and their reading time that they do want to see more characters that are represented. And so I think, we quite often dismiss teenagers as not being an important demographic, but really all cultural shifts that happen are from that age usually. And so they're the ones that are driving this change and kind of saying, no, we don't want this anymore. We don't want the same stories our parents were told. We want new stories. We want more. We want to expand this. And I think that people with a keen eye who are seeing the trends and watching as people purchase stories that have more diversity are realizing oh, right, okay. And then it kind of slowly starts to spread out to the rest of the community. But usually it is driven by young people and their desire and willingness to have more change.
Yeah, I agree with Ali. I think a lot of it has to do with just the open-mindedness of younger generations. But my first fat main character was April in Spoiler Alert, and that is a romance. And that actually is what really kicked me into reading romance, is the diversity there. But I also think it's just people are more willing to accept that in a romantic storyline than they are a very heavily physical storyline, which we all know the main argument for not having plus size characters in fantasy is they can't do physical things, which is obviously not accurate. So yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it too, just the setting. And also a lot of romance that I've read is contemporary, and that's where the plus size main characters are. And I think people are more willing to accept it in today's world than anything that's not based in current today. At least that's what I've seen. But I know we've talked about how there's a lack of it in historical romance, or at least the cover is the issue. There's just a lot more boundaries in other genres, I think, as opposed to romance.
I've been looking for a fat character in a YA thriller. Has anyone found one?
There is Eat Your Heart Out, and I don't know if it's a thriller or horror, but
Oh,
like
the zombie thriller. I love that book. But
it's so
yeah,
good.
but like in a high school thriller, like One of Us is Lying or something like that. You know what I mean? Like
I read a lot of
there's
thrillers,
gaps
and I
there.
have yet to find one.
No.
And
Yeah.
I find the most fat phobia in thrillers.
Yeah, me too.
So I don't know. I think that genre will be another challenging one like fantasy.
It's an
Yeah.
interesting issue too, because is it the specific readership or what they're expecting? I don't know. And how can we grow that? I don't know. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you see a lot of arguments for, as in fantasy, especially, of people saying like a character can't, hike a mountain or wield an axe or all of these things. But actually, if you think about, like, if you even look at like the Olympians, like
Yeah.
nowadays, the ones who are doing the heavy lifting, the body types of the people who are doing like what would have been wielding a sword or carrying an axe are bigger bodied people, and they're peak athletes. And I just find it so funny that people find it more believable that a very skinny person would be able to brandish a longsword than a fat person. Like, that just is kind of like mind boggling to me, that is the logic is that they're not, all fat people aren't physically fit, and therefore they couldn't have done this adventure or things like that. When you think about like the body type of a person who would probably be the most successful doing this adventure would probably be someone in a bigger body.
Yeah.
And
That's why I love, sorry.
no,
I was just thinking that's why I love Luisa in Encanto.
that's exactly what I was gonna say.
I thought all our brains are like, I was just thinking about Olympians, but like I love her so much. And what I love is not just about how strong and beautiful she is and like what a great representation it is, and all of the people who have come out like and saying, I can see myself for the first time, but all of the kids who are literally watching the show, little girls, little boys, and wanting to be Luisa, wanting to be that strong hero. Like, didn't they say, I read something where they said that they didn't have enough merch for Luisa because they thought everyone would want to be Isabella. And it's like, no, we want to be big and strong. We want something new. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. So I think the more we see in fantasy, the bigger that vision really will get. So I have lots of hope in the future for where fantasy is going.
Yeah, I have lots of hope too, just because when it does start with YA and even fantasy romance, those readers branch out. And it's kind of like, so I didn't give you guys this question, but it just came up in my mind that it's kind of the same thing with traditional publishing and self-publishing, because self-publishing can say, I see whatever I'm gonna see and I can write it. And so there's a lot of fat rep in self-published. And then when you cross into traditional publishing, you have a whole industry being like, I don't know if your character should be fat. And so I think that adds another layer. And I feel like when self-publishing authors can prove that their books do well, that maybe traditional publishers will take notice.
Yeah. And I think with traditional publishing, I know there's been a lot of times I've been trying to get a traditional fantasy novel with a fat main character. That's what I've been pushing. And I've now gone through 2 proposals. And I'm working on my 3rd, and that has not gone through. And it's interesting because a lot of times traditional publishers will see inclusion of fat characters as a issue book. You know what I mean? Like, we need to have the time to really go through all of the different things that I'm sorry, my son, if you could hear him crying in the background, I'm so sorry. I texted my kid to feed him, but let's see. That works or not. Sorry about that. I might need to go in a minute, but what was I saying? Sorry. Joys of parenting. And
Oh, that being a fat character book is an issue book.
And so it's like trying to have the time and space to do all of the world building of a fantasy book and all of the story arcs, but then also having diversity. There can be pushback because they're like, I don't know. It's trying to get that balance just right. But I think, again, maybe I'm not the right one to go through and push that door down. But one story I'm really excited about is Trisha Levenseller. I don't know if you know. She's announced that her next book has a fat main character, and she's a big fantasy YA fantasy name, and she's one of my good friends, and I know that she's very, very passionate about getting Fat Rep done right. And so I'm really excited. I think that when more big names go out there and have more Ninas and more big characters in fantasy, I think that it will help so that smaller names can also get through with our own little fat stories, and maybe they'll see it less as an issue and more just a character quirk.
All right, well, those are the questions. Does anyone have anything else they want to bring up? If not, we can talk about where we can be found, where you can follow us, and what we have coming up. So if we're ready to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Sheena Bulkweg. You can find me on Twitter at Sheena Bulkweg, or on TikTok at Sheena Bulkweg, or on Instagram at Sheena Bulkweg. And you can also find me bulkwegbooks.com.
All right. And
Okay, I'm Alexis Maness. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Alexis Maness. My first book will be Curves and Magic, which is coming out on March 11th. And then my debut full-length novel will be out aiming for end of June. And that will be a revenge plot, dark fantasy for adults. So yeah, really excited about that.
all right.
And you can find me at akmulford.com or at akmulfordauthor on TikTok or at akmulford on Facebook. I'm also contributing to the Curves and Magic anthology that comes out on March 11th. And then my next book in my 5 Crowns of Oakrith series comes out April 26th. And that also has a fat main character in it, love interest. So yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much, ladies. This was such a fun discussion. I think it's really important. So thank you for taking the time to have this with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.